Also known as the Dark Age, Disney's Bronze Age is a period of animation that I think has been seriously overlooked and even demonized. After the death of Walt Disney in 1966, the studio was forced into a completely new direction just to stay afloat. Losing Walt was already a major blow, but when Roy O. Disney passed in 1971, it became clear that the Disney people were used to didn't exist anymore. What followed was a stretch of films that feel different but also far more interesting than they're given credit for. The Bronze Age runs from about 1970 to 1988 and includes 8 films. For some people, these films just read as the forgettable Disney movies. That reputation has stuck for years, and it's exactly why I believe this era is underrated. These films get dismissed before people even take the time to really look at what they're doing. During this time, Disney wasn't operating from a place of confidence like they were used to. It was in survival mode. Walt had been the creative center of the studio, and without him, there was no clear roadmap. Additionally, Disney's 9 old men were getting older and starting to step away. A younger generation was stepping in, but they simply didn't have the same authority or experience. On top of that, budgets were getting tighter, competition was growing, and there was a real sense of uncertainty hanging over the entire studio. The question wasn't just what Disney should do next, it was whether it could even continue at the same level at all. That uncertainty shows up in the films themselves. Compared to the clean optimism of earlier eras, such as the Silver Age, films in the Bronze Age have a noticeably heavier tone. These movies deal with ideas like loss, prejudice, and moral conflict in ways that feel more grounded. The Fox and the Hound is a great example. At its core, it's about 2 friends being forced apart because of the roles society assigns to them. That's not really a simple children's story, it's closer to a tragedy, and it hits that way when you watch it. Another film, such as The Rescuers, leans into a darker territory, with the kidnapped child Penny and genuinely threatening villains. These films weren't trying to recreate fairy tale perfection. They were reacting to a world that felt more complicated, and that shift gives them a kind of emotional weight that stands out even today. Moments in these movies linger longer than you would expect, especially if you go back to them as an adult instead of remembering them as background childhood viewing. Especially The Rescuers. God, that movie was messed up. The visual style also reflects this transitional period. Disney started utilizing Xerox technology to speed up production. The films were still hand-drawn, just in a different process. It made the process cheaper and faster, but it also gave the films a rougher, sketch-like appearance. Movies like Robin Hood and the Aristocats clearly have visible line work that feels much looser compared to something like Sleeping Beauty. Some people took that as a drop in quality, but I'm personally a huge fan of this stylization, especially in regards to the way backgrounds were drawn during this time. I mean, just look at this.
It seems like only yesterday.
There's also a lot more experimentation going on than people actually realize. The Black Cauldron is a clear example of this. Even though it was the most expensive animated film ever produced at its time of release in 1985, it didn't succeed commercially, and for a long time it was treated like a failure that Disney would rather forget. But visually, it's one of the boldest things the studio has ever attempted. It leans fully into dark fantasy, and even if it doesn't exactly work as a film, the ambition behind it is hard to ignore. During the Bronze Age, things were also unstable within Disney itself. Animators like the great Don Bluth left the studio, taking talent with them and creating direct competition. It was a period of transition not just for Disney, but for the entire animation industry. The studio was caught in the middle of that shift, trying to hold on to its legacy while figuring out how to move forward and keep turning a profit. The turning point came with The Great Mouse Detective. It's a tighter, much more confident film, with strong pacing and one of the best Disney villains to this day. It also briefly features early CGI during a clock tower sequence, which was a big step toward the future of animation. This movie proved that Disney still had the creative potential it needed, and it played a major role in keeping the animation department alive after the failure of The Black Cauldron. Then, Oliver and Company pushed things further with a modern setting and a contemporary soundtrack. It felt more in tune with the late 1980s, and it showed that Disney was starting to reconnect with audiences. By the time it was released in 1988, the next phase was already on the way. The Little Mermaid would arrive shortly after and start the Disney Renaissance. What ultimately makes the Bronze Age stand out is its unique stylization, experimental animation techniques, and importance to the history of Disney's animation department. The films are not perfect or as influential as films from previous or later eras, but they still hold up today. Many of these films have achieved a cult following in recent years following the current tumultuous nature of the animation industry. To me, this era didn't weaken Disney. It forced the studio to adapt, to experiment, and to eventually rediscover what made its storytelling work in the first place. Without that process, the success of the Renaissance wouldn't have happened the way it did. A lot of these films deserve a second look, not just as experiments, but as meaningful pieces of animation history. They reflect a different kind of Disney, That alone makes the films from this era worthy of a second watch. Thank you for watching, and check out my other videos.